Do you know the difference between carving and whittling? So carving is you take a piece of wood and you create something that, like a spoon or a toy cow or whatever you're creating. Whittling is when you start with a piece of wood, and this is how they did it in Kentucky. I sat at a courthouse square in eastern Kentucky with a bunch of retired coal miners. They had pieces of wood about this long, soft white pine, straight grain, about that wide, about that thick. And they had these knives that were about this long. They're real thin and super sharp. And then you just take that and you run the blade down along the edge of the wood and you create this really thin spiral of shaving that falls on the ground. And that's what you do. You keep turning it and eventually you got a nice pointed piece of wood and you just keep shaving it until there's no more wood. And then you have a pile of shavings and you take another one. And these guys would show up there every day about 2 o'clock. And they'd whittle until about 5 o'clock. And then they go home for dinner. And that's whittling. So back in the early 90s, I lived in southeast Lancaster. And it was a tough time for my neighborhood. It was a time when people knew where to go to look for illegal drugs was my neighborhood. And it really made me mad. I'd be walking around the neighborhood. I was a 30-something person walking around the neighborhood, and people would be saying, "Hey, what are you looking for? What do you want to buy today?" Thinking, "You looking at me? Do I look like somebody who's here? This is my neighborhood. You're trying to sell me drugs? Get out of here." I even yelled at a few of them. It was my neighbor Phil that clued me in. He said, "When you're walking down the street, Daryl, you're looking like the Iowa farm boy that you were growing up. You're looking people in the eye. You're saying hello. You're nodding to people. You're sending all the wrong messages." Phil said, "When I walk down the street, I'm looking straight ahead. I don't make eye contact." I hated it, walking down the street not saying hello to people, but I learned how to do that. So I'm teaching at a school, 5th grade, about 8 blocks from the house. And every day I walk across East End Avenue, crossing over Ann Street in that corner. Didn't take a rocket scientist to know what was happening at that corner. A car would come down the street slowly. There'd be a young man standing on the corner. The car would stop. They'd roll down the passenger side window. The young man would walk up to the window. They'd talk for 10 seconds. The man would step back. They'd drive down the block to the end of the block. Another guy would come walking up to the passenger side window. The driver of the car would hand the guy something. It was money. He'd walk back to the sidewalk. Another guy would walk up, pick up the money. He would leave the area. The car would go around the corner, and around the corner was the 4th guy, and often it was a kid. The reason they used kids is because if the kid got caught holding the drugs, nothing much would happen. If it was an adult, it was a big deal. So the kid would be there, and he'd reach under the bush, or he'd go behind the fence or whatever. He'd drop it in through the passenger side window. The car would leave, and this is my neighborhood. At the school I was teaching, I was 5th grade, and there was a boy, I'm going to call him Thomas, that wasn't his name. He would show up at school with brand new sneakers, expensive sneakers, gold chains, things like that. The other kids knew what was going on, and I knew what was going on. I was angry and couldn't do anything about it. Just put my head down and walk. One day I was coming home from school. It was cold, it was rainy, and I'm standing there at the corner of Ann and East End Avenue, 3 blocks from home, and there's a young man, he's standing right here. He's not looking at me, I'm not looking at him, we're just standing there waiting for the traffic. I couldn't take it anymore, I said, in the most cutting voice that I could manage. "You must be really proud of yourself standing out here in the cold and the rain selling drugs. You must feel really good about yourself." Then I looked at him and he said, "I'm not selling drugs." I looked at him and I said, "Of course you are. I see you here every day. You're standing right here. You're ruining the lives of my neighborhood. You're ruining the lives of kids that I teach." And then, breaking the traffic, I started walking across the road. I got about halfway across, and I heard his voice. No anger. Just a question. The question was, do you have a better job for me? Talk about thinking again. I got to the other side. Do you have a better job for me? Just whittling away that anger. Turned around, walked back. Said two things. I'm sorry, I don't have a better job for you. And I'm sorry I talked to you the way I did. He was only there a couple more weeks. I'd see him every day. But with him, I looked at him every day. He's at work. I'm coming home from work. Said hello, gave him a nod, walked on down the road. Sometimes you just have to think again. Thank you.